G'day gamers, Ranger Tony here with another Pathfinder Kingmaker tutorial video, where today we're going to talk about all things fighter. Chances are when you think of role-playing games, the first class that comes to mind is the fighter. Every role-playing game has their version of the fighter, and the fighter is just so versatile. You can be nearly anything you can think of. You want to be a knight in heavy armor with a sword and a shield? You can. You want to be a bruiser with a two-handed axe? You can. You want to be a mercenary who looks like a walking armory? You can. You want to be an agile fighter weaving through battle with two weapons? You can. You want to be a deadly archer killing from afar? You can. And so much more. If you look at a lot of the fiction out there, you'll get lots of ideas for, and other role-playing games as well. If you look at all of those, you'll see lots of ideas for different variations of the fighter that you can make. So let's just have a general overview look at the fighter and its archetypes. So the real strength of the fighter is that you get a bonus feat every even level. Normally, every character gets a feat at every odd level. You also get bonus feats at every even level. This means that you're going to progress very, very quickly, and you can become very powerful very, very quickly. Add this to these special abilities that you get down here, and you get a very, very strong class. So the first one that the fighter gets is bravery. So you get a bonus to your save versus fear, which just goes up. So by level 18, it's a +5. You also get armor training. So this does two things. It reduces the penalty for your armor, but it also increases the dex bonus that you can get from the armor. So the armor check penalty is really only used for things like casting spells. So that is an advantage if you want a dual class, but the dexterity is quite good. It means that even if you're wearing, say, plate armor, which has an armor class of 9 and a max dex bonus of 1, as soon as you take armor training, that dex bonus will now be 2. And it goes up to a maximum of 5. 4, and then you get the armor mastery at the end, where you also get damage reduction. So it means that if you're willing to take high dex for your character, you're going to get a lot better use of your armor at the same time. And that applies to any armor, whether you're using padded armor all the way up to plate mail. And then finally, you get this weapon training. So initially you pick one weapon type, such as heavy swords, which covers long swords and bastard swords and falcatas and scimitars and a whole bunch of other single-handed slashing weapons. And you get a +1 bonus to attack and damage for that. And then that increases to +2, +3, and then eventually +4. And as a fighter, you can take a second weapon as well and get up to +3 in that. So what it means is that by level 20, you're very good at saving versus fear. So you're very brave. You don't get feared very often. Your armor can potentially be way better than anyone else's, and you're doing way more damage. Now, on top of these, you also get access to a few feats which only exist for the fighter. And the main one here that I want to bring up is weapon specialization and its follow-on greater weapon specialization. So weapon specialization adds a +2 to damage for any weapon that you choose. You have to already have weapon focus in it, but let's say you do weapon focus in longsword. You take weapon specialization, and now you're going to get a +2 to damage in that as well. And then greater weapon specialization adds a further 2. So between those, you're getting +4. And then your weapon training, you're getting another +4 in a particular weapon. So even with nothing else added, by the end of this, you're +8 better than any other person is, any other character type is at fighting with that particular weapon. And that's why even a archer, Spectre's Ranger, will be better than, a fighter, Spectre's Archer, will be better than a Ranger who uses the archery feats, because you've got this weapon training and the weapon specialization that's doing extra damage and extra to hit as well. You've got weapon focus, which everyone can get, but this weapon training also gives you a +1 to hit. So, and include that with the extra feats that you get, it means you can get a lot of the feats that other classes can get a lot quicker than they can. So you're able to do all of those really, really well. So ultimately, you're going to consistently do more physical damage than any other class, right? So now let's look at some of the subtypes, the archetypes. The Aldori Defender, well, the main difference, and I've done a full video on this, which I recommend you look at, but the main difference between the Aldori Defender and a normal fighter is that they give up armor training, and instead they get this defensive parry, which is sort of the same. As long as you're using the dueling sword, you get a +1 bonus to your AC, and that eventually becomes a +5 by the end. So that is similar to the dex check that you get, the dex bonus that you get from armor training, except you don't need to have high dexterity to do it. Having said that, Aldoris, you generally build them as a dex build rather than a strength build, but that's fine. And they also get some of these special abilities down here, which are basically abilities that affect disarming and a bit more AC bonus. So you're getting a lot of bonuses to your armor class and the disarm skill. But you have to use the dueling sword. So any of these special abilities here, well, not armor mastery, but disarming strike, steel net, and counterattack doesn't, but disarming strike and steel net must use the dueling sword, as must the defensive parry. So that's the downside of being the Aldori Defender. If, however, you want to do something a little bit different for an Aldori Defender, consider building a dual-wielding Aldori Defender, so you dual-wield the dueling swords. The only disadvantage to this is none of your skills here are affected by this, but there are a couple of feats, Aldori Mastery, I think it's called, which you can't use if you're dual wielding, and then things like Slashing Grace won't work if you're dual wielding, and finally you can't go to the Aldori Swordlord Prestige class because some of their feats, most of the special abilities you get there, like Deft Strike, only work when you're using a single sword by itself with nothing in your offhand. So you can't use a shield, you can't use a second weapon, even if it's a dagger or anything like that. So basically, defensive parry, I believe, is the same. Saving slash, again, I think is the same. So, yeah, you just have to be aware that you might not be able to go down that route, but ultimately, a dual wielding is something different for an Aldori because you don't see them do that. Or you could go with a sword and a shield, but again, you're going to lose some abilities. The next subtype is the Tower Shield Specialist. They lose bravery and the weapon training, and instead they get this burst barrier, which is an extra defense from their tower shield, and they get some extra tower shield, an extra specialist here gives them more. They reduce the penalty on their attack rolls, and then they get extra, protection against touch attacks and total cover so they can't be flanked, things like that. But the rest of it is pretty much the same. This class, you end up being a tank, and that is your sole purpose. So I really wouldn't build one unless you're going for full plate armor, tower shield, give yourself high constitution so you've got extra hit points, and your purpose is to stand in the front line in front of everybody else and take the hits. You're probably not going to do as much damage because you don't have that weapon training, so you're not going to do as much damage as a standard fighter, but you're going to be very well protected. If you want to try something a little bit different, consider using a javelin or a throwing axe as your weapon, because then you can do ranged attacks but still be very defensive. So give that a try. And lastly, there's the two-handed fighter. So the two-handed fighter gives up the bravery and the armor training to get this strong grip, which gives them better use of the sunder armor and disarm combat maneuvers. And they also get these things like this overhand chop, which allows them to use their strength better with their... and the strength bonus doesn't apply equally to every attack if you've got multiple attacks. So these feats here fix that, basically. And then you've got Pile Driver, which makes it easier. You can do trips or bull rushes against an opponent that you successfully attack against. You still get weapon training, but your weapon training is forced to the two-handed weapon route. You can't change that. So you're going to do a lot of damage because that's what two-handed weapons specialize in. Things to consider, you might want to consider using pole arms. So don't forget that pole arms are two-handed weapons as well. So things like the Bardich, the Grisam, I think it is. There's another one, I can't think. There's a long spear. And they have reach. So you can be attacking from the back line or from behind your companions, but still doing all this extra damage. Now, the Aldori Defender and the two-handed fighter are relying on some combat maneuvers. So we saw here that we have the disarm. This you've got to, if you want to get the full advantage of this, you want to be using disarm. And if you want to be getting the full advantage of your two-handed fighter, you want to be doing sunder armor or disarm. So firstly, you need to have at least an intelligence of 13 to be able to use disarm, and I think sunder armor might be the same. Secondly, you have to be aware that those abilities, and this includes other things like trip as well and bull rush, they take up your entire combat. So at low levels, they're great. If you've got disarm at an early level as an Aldori Defender, you're going to, it's going to seem great. Take a chance. Yep, it's successful. You disarm your opponent for one or more rounds. Great. But once you get up to like level 5 or 6 and you're getting 2 attacks per round or more, so, from here upwards you get 2 attacks per round as a fighter, the problem is going to be that you have to give up that extra attack, or attacks plural, to be able to use this ability. And that's not something you always want to do. So just be aware of that. Also, not all of your opponents are going to have an actual weapon or armor that you can use those abilities for. And I'm pretty sure the game stops you from using disarm against, say, a Manticore, which doesn't have a weapon, a sword or anything like that, and doesn't have armor. It has a natural weapon and it has natural armor, and so those abilities don't work against them. Okay, so you just need to be aware of that. On a similar vein, one common feat that a lot of people take is Cleave. If you've played some of the earlier games, Neverwinter Nights 1 and 2, for example, you'll have seen Cleave, and it's a really great ability in those games, but it's different here in Pathfinder Kingmaker. So here, Cleave has to be activated like Disarm does. So you have to actively say, I want to use Cleave in this attack. And what happens is, if you hit, you get a free attack at another opponent who's within range. So if you're being surrounded, you can hit one opponent. You say, I'm going to use Cleave against this opponent. You hit them, and you get a free attack against the person next to them. So if you want to picture that, you're doing a massive swing. It hits the first opponent, and your sword continues off and hits the next opponent. That's sort of the idea. That seems great at first level. At low level, it seems like a great ability. But again, like the Disarm and Sunder, once you've got more than one attack per round, you lose those other attacks. So as soon as you've got 2 attacks per round, you have a problem. If you use Cleave and your first attack misses, you're done. You don't get another attack. Whereas normally, if you attack and you have 2 attacks per round, if the first attack misses, that doesn't matter. Your second attack will go towards the target, and if it hits, great. And so, by the end of the game, by level 20, if you've got 5 attacks per round, you don't want to be using Cleave, because first of all, you'd only have a maximum of 2 attacks. Now, there is like Great Cleave, which gives you unlimited number of attacks. But you go from a guaranteed 5 attacks, even if they don't all hit, to 1 attack that if misses, you lose everything for that round. So just be really aware of Cleave. Now, I'm not saying don't use it. Don't take it. Take it. Use it for the first 2 levels. As soon as you get more than 1 attack per round, though, stop using Cleave, and you will want to take Cleaving Finish. Cleaving Finish is passive. You don't have to turn it on, right? Well, if you do, you turn it on and leave it on, and it's just always there. And the way it works is exactly how Cleave worked in Neverwinter Nights. And that is, when you hit and kill an opponent, you then get a free attack at another opponent next to you. And it's just a one free attack with Cleaving Finish. Right? But what that means is, if you've got 3 attacks per round, and I attack an opponent, my first attack hits, does some damage. My second attack hits and kills my opponent, I then get a free attack at a nearby opponent, and I still have my third attack in the round that I can use at that opponent as well. So that's a nice ability. And as I said, you don't have to turn it on, it's just there. And then later on, you'll want to get improved Cleaving Finish, which gives you unlimited numbers of attacks. So in that case, as before, my first attack hits, second attack hits and kills. I swing at another opponent. If I kill them as well, I get a free swing at another opponent, and I still have my third attack that I can use in this round. So that one is where you'll want to go eventually. So just be careful, be aware that Cleave is not the greatest thing around. Now, there is also these other abilities that you can do, Sickening Cleave and stuff like that. So you'll want to get those and put them in the mix as well. But yeah, I just thought I'd mention that because that wasn't immediately obvious to me when I first started using Cleave and even Disarm and Sunder Armor and things like that. So be aware of those. So what I'm going to do now, just to finish up, is I'm just going to give you a couple of interesting things you might want to try as just something, different. So despite the primary attribute of a fighter being strength, the armor training ability rewards you for having high dexterity. So if you build a dexterity-based fighter, you're going to have the advantage that not only are you able to do more damage from your weapon training and from the weapon specialization feats, but you're going to have almost insanely high armor class as well. So interestingly, this is why my Fighter Spectres Archer build that I've got works so really, really well. Because they're able to do that extra damage from the weapon training and the weapon specialization, as well as having a really good AC. But you could do this as a dex-based melee fighter as well. Okay? And your options there are dual wielding. Works well for that because you've got the high dex that you can do it, and you've got all of the extra feats that you can use to take that. So that's probably the main way to do it. The other one is go as an elf and use the elven sword, which is a two-handed weapon that you can use with finesse, and therefore you can use your dex to hit. So those are a couple of ideas on that. The final one, which is something that is a little bit silly, but if you want to play something really silly, why not play a fighter that uses unarmed combat with plate mail armor? So you've got the extra AC provided by your armor training, and at the same time, your weapon training and weapon specialization give you a bonus to your unarmed attacks. Now, unfortunately, even at 20th level, the damage that you're going to do is not great. I've worked out it's only about 15 to 17 points of damage per round, because your unarmed only does, if you take weapon focus on unarmed and then you take improved unarmed strike, your weapon, your fist only does 1d3 of damage. But you end up with 14 points of bonuses from your weapon training and weapon specialization, etc. So it's just something silly that you could try if you really wanted to. And incidentally, make him a dwarf and call him Pwent, and you've just built your Battle Rager from the Dritz Duerden stories. So anyway, that's my thoughts on the fighter. As I said, you can build the fighter into anything that you want. Any combination. You don't have to specialize in one weapon. You can do multiple. It's common to have multiple weapons that you specialize in, so that you might have two-handed sword as your main weapon. You might have mace and shield as your backup that you can use against, say, undead. And you also carry a heavy crossbow so that you can take out opponents from afar. Very common thing to do as a fighter. Very easy to do as a fighter because you've got lots of skills there that you can take, lots of feats that you can take, one per level, to build that up and make it a very good fighter. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a like and share it with your friends. Be sure to subscribe to keep up to date with all of my latest tutorials, and I will see you for the next one. Thanks a lot. Bye.